First of all, the lack of maturity and seriousness on the other part, and the threats to implode the conference, and insisting on an element as if we have come here to meet for 1 hour, to hand over everything to them, and then to go back, which shows a lack of maturity, as I have just said, and it also is indicative of the illusions that they are living in. I said it was because of two reasons. This is one reason, and the second reason is the very tense atmosphere that the United States of America wanted to engulf this conference in because of its flagrant intervention in elements related to this conference, in particular in guiding the other party as of the beginning of the meetings that started in Montreux and until the decision of supplying arms, which came concomitant to the holding of this meeting. What happened now, all you know the details of, despite all the media information and the media flow, which in some cases was not a precise reflection of what took place. Very briefly, what happened was that we came to Geneva open to everything, and we agreed to discuss all elements. But the other side, it seems to me that the other side had not quite well read the Geneva communiqué, and they only focused on one item, and they do not want to discuss anything outside that item. We have discussed, and that is something that I have told Mr. Lakhdar Ibrahimi as of the beginning of this week, it is better in cases like that for us to take steps upon which the Syrians will not disagree, steps that could form a common ground that would contribute to making progress. Therefore, we started with submitting a draft political declaration that underlines the territorial integrity of Syria, its sovereignty, and the commitment to liberate occupied Syrian land. We spoke of a future democratic Syria, a pluralistic Syria, Syria that respects intellectual diversity. We spoke about rejecting foreign intervention in both its direct and its indirect forms. Unfortunately, this paper was rejected outright. They said that it falls outside the scope of Geneva I, and we said that it falls in the heart of Geneva I, the Geneva Communique. Those who would read the Geneva Communique would see that the preamble or the introduction of the communique speaks of that. The American decision of Congress was taken to fund the arming of the opposition, and between inverted commas, the moderate opposition, as if those who took this decision are sitting on the moon. They know that there is no moderate opposition. There are terrorist organizations, ISIS, Al-Nusra, the Islamic Front, Al-Jabha al-Islamiyya, and others. Those are the ones that are destroying the the infrastructure. Those are the ones that are killing the civilians. Now, if the United States of America considers these as moderate, well and good for the United States. We asked for the adoption of a declaration to denounce this American measure, and every Syrian in the homeland does denounce this step, but they refused. Before the end of the meeting, the week before the end of the week, and as an attempt on the part of our delegation to find common ground upon which not only the Syrians would not disagree, but any rational citizen in this globe, the condemnation of terrorism. Now, if they ask people living in New York about that, they will agree to work towards fighting terrorism. Now, those are Security Council resolutions, and we mentioned these in the introduction to the draft statement, but they refused. And here a question arises. Are those Syrians? Are those possible partners for the construction of the future of Syria? We have come to Geneva carrying with us the concerns and the demands of our people, and in the forefront of those concerns is the combat of terrorism. It seems that they are totally detached from what is happening in Syria. Even the statement on terrorism, it had been extracted from the Geneva Communique. If you read the Geneva Communique, you will find in every paragraph the fact underlined that there has to be stability and there has to be security, and that would pave the way to a political solution. Unfortunately, neither the United States nor the supporters of these, neither of those have created the positive environment that would enable making progress in dialogue. I met with Mr. Lakhdar Ibrahimi before beginning the dialogue, and I told him that the future of Syria is difficult to decide with a group that represents a small current that calls itself an opposition, because there is also the national opposition in the homeland. Why have they not been invited? So that this dialogue, so that the discussions would be more comprehensive, we have to invite the greater representation of the opposition and civil society organizations. They have to be invited to this dialogue for this dialogue to be constructive and for all to feel that they are participating in the shaping of the future. He said that that was the responsibility of the two states that took the initiative to hold this dialogue, and I told him, and it is the responsibility of the Secretary General, because I know that most of this opposition felt surprised that they were not invited to attend this dialogue. Therefore, we are still hopeful, and we still insist to engage in dialogue with the largest possible representative group that represents our people. And this is an extremely important element, because when those come, we will make every effort, we shall spare no effort for that dialogue to take place in Syria, because the constructive dialogue will take place under the sky of our homeland. Finally, so that I would not be too lengthy in my statement, we are the delegation of the Syrian Arab Republic. We are returning to our homeland. We are returning to inform our people and our government of all the details of what has taken place. And here I would like to pay tribute to the awareness of our people who supported us and who stood beside us in all the efforts that we have engaged in, and they did this in every way, and this is something that helped us greatly. And here, for us to be at the level, or we live up to the responsibilities that the people of Syria have placed in us. Thank you.
شكرا رانيا دنون الإخبارية السورية. معالي الوزير لطالما تحدثتم عن واقع المعارضة المتواجدة أو الائتلاف.
Thank you, Rania Danoun from Ikhbariya Suria. Your Excellency, you have spoken about the coalition or the opposition here in Geneva. If there is no change to this representation, what will you do? Are you going to come back again under such circumstances for another round of discussions or talks? Mr. Muallem, in fact, we represent the concerns and the interests of our people. If we find that that is a demand, and the orientation would be then for us to come back, then we will come back. Thank you, Excellency Musa Asi from Al Mayadeen. If the talks remain this way without any results, why then should the talks continue? And second, do you believe that perhaps there has to be a review of Geneva 1, the Geneva Communique 1, totally, so that it would be more related to the current talks? Mr. Al-Muallem, I have to recognize that Geneva 1 as a communique was formulated in the absence of the Syrians. And in the Geneva communique, there are still some diversions over the interpretation of some paragraphs between the United States and the Russian Federation, but that is the reality that we have before us. And we said we are willing to discuss Geneva 1, the Geneva Communique 1 item, all the items of it, one after the other. And there is no reason for us to hesitate or to shy away from the discussion, but for us to review the issue of coming back or not. As I said, wherever there is the interest of the Syrian people, we will be there to serve the interests of the Syrian people.
When are you able to tell us whether you get right for Tagesspiegel Berlin? Minister, please, can you tell us when are you able to tell us whether you get back to Geneva or not? What date? Is it tomorrow or Monday or Tuesday? You know, time is running out. We have only a couple of days left before you should or supposed to meet again.
I agreed with Mr. Ali Brahimi. When we get the requisite directives, I shall contact him and tell him.
ريتا ضو أجنس فرانس
Rita Dow, Agence France Presse, the Minister of Information of Syria said today that the Syrian delegation will not make any concessions, be that during the current round or the future round. Why would there be negotiations then? And does concessions mean only concerning the requests and the demands of the other side concerning President Bashar al-Assad, or is it absolute? We will not make any concessions concerning any insignificant or small part of our soil. But what was said, I do wish to tell you, neither the Geneva communique spoke of that. It didn't speak of that. And I said in Montreux, nobody could replace the Syrian people in deciding upon its leadership. And the second point, the fate of those who would guide Syria is in the hands of the Syrian people. Excellency, I am Mohammed Ballout from Al Safir, Lebanese newspaper. Today, Mr. Gennady Getelov, the Deputy Prime Minister, said that maybe the TGB would be discussed on the 10th of February if the next round is held. So, is there an expectation that will be more pressure from the Russians on you? Does that not show that there are priorities that are differing now between you and the Russian side? And will you respond to those pressures that will be brought to bear? Microphone. Lost the speaker. Mr. Al-Muallem. The question of the transitional governing body or the transitional cabinet falls in the heart of Geneva, of the Geneva communique, and I think it's not the first item, it's the 8th item on it, and we never said at any moment that we do not discuss this item or that we will not discuss this item. We are a country that has a constitution, and we have our leadership, we have a government, we have our institutions, and for that we are willing to discuss. But for us to discuss, we have to know the identity of the other side. Are they Syrians or are they not?
معالي الوزير وفد الجمهورية العربية السورية جاء إلى هنا وفي أولويته
Thank you, Eliasar Ma'ala, National Syrian Television. Excellency, the delegation of the Syrian Arab Republic came here with a priority for the discussion of the fighting of terrorism, and yet at the same time daily we hear scores of times 3 accusations that are addressed to the government of Syria. First, ISIS is a creation of the regime. Hundreds of explosive barrels daily fall on the civilians in Syria, and that the Syrian army is targeting civilians and not military people of the so-called Free Syrian Army. Mr. Al-Muallem, we should not really be surprised because there is a string of accusations. The accusations didn't take place in Geneva. We see them on the satellite television stations about the bloodshed and the bloodshed in Syria. I want to give you a simple and brief response that has been said before me by His Excellency the Minister of Information. Do you want to defend our people by sending SMS messages to those murderers?
معالي الوزير في مؤتمر صحفي قبل قليل للائتلاف تحدث بأن ما يجري في سوريا
Hana Al-Saleh, Sama television station. Sir, in a press conference by the coalition a while ago, they said that what is taking place in Syria is a sectarian war and that the state is killing one sect at the expense of another. I shall not go into the details, but is there pressure for the opposition inside to be present, like, for example, U.S.-Russian attempts? Microphone for Mr. Al-Muallem, please. I said that I hope that the foundation of the dialogue will be expanded to include the largest number possible of representatives of the Syrian society, be them the opposition or civil society organizations. But concerning what has been said by the person who spoke before me, I shall not respond to that. But I shall say that, unfortunately, we have concluded during the current week the huge divide between them and what is happening on the ground in Syria. They are not in touch at all with what is taking place on the ground in Syria. Of course, if you stay in 5-star hotels abroad, you will be detached from reality. Let them go. Let them go to Raqqa. Let them go to Aleppo countryside. Let them go to old Homs. Let them go so that we could see what would happen to them. Samir Youssef Sham FM, Excellency. In every meeting or in every press conference that is held for the members of the coalition, they repeat and they say, according to the law and according to Security Council resolutions, the beginning has to be first with discussing the TGB, and that the TGB, the transitional governing body, will be first and then other items will be discussed. Is there a legal text that determines which of the items should be implemented first? Second, is there a possibility for creating this TGB currently or right now? Mr. Al-Muallem, the foundation upon which the talks are taking place is the Geneva I communique, and there is no other foundation that could be taken into account because the invitation that we received was on the basis of the Geneva I communique, and we said that we are willing to discuss every item in the Geneva communique without any hesitation. But when we see that the simplest of priorities that the Syrians are unanimous over, they refuse that and they reject that, here we have to stop and ask ourselves a question, or a few questions. How are those going to be partners in the fashioning of the future of Syria? And therefore, I say that the sole document around which we are carrying out our discussions is the Geneva I communique. Was there another part to your question? Is it possible, says the journalist, to create this transitional government body currently now as Syria is living through the circumstances it is living through? Mr. Al-Muallem, there are interpretations. Some people say body, some people say a new government. And both have got the same objective. We have got a government, and when we see a real partner for the construction of the future, they can join the government according to the Geneva communique, because the Geneva communique spoke about three categories in the formation of the TGB. They spoke about the current government. It speaks about the current government. It speaks about the opposition, and it speaks about independence and other organs. So there are three components of the TGB. Who is going to represent the opposition in the coming government?
Tom Miles from
This is a question.
Reuters News Agency. So I'd like to ask you about confidence-building measures, specifically from Reuters News Agency. So I'd like to ask you about confidence-building measures, specifically humanitarian access, specifically Homs, and specifically the aid convoy, which has not been let in. I asked your deputy, Mr. Mekdad, earlier this week, why hasn't it been let in? And he said, I quote, "We are still waiting for assurances that these convoys will not go to armed groups, to terrorist groups inside the city. We want them to go to the women and children." Now, as you know, denying access to medical and food aid is illegal under international law, and using starvation as a weapon of war may be a war crime. Now, are you and President Assad and the governor of Homs not worried that you are committing a war crime to win a point at the Geneva talks? Thank you.
First, the issue of the old city of Homs was raised, and we were told that there were contacts between the coalition called the opposition and the armed elements in Homs, while we know that there are great efforts that are being made by the United Nations resident representative in Damascus and the governor of Homs. And this resident representative is in touch or is making contacts with the armed groups. That was before we came to Geneva. And 3 times there were attempts to allow the civilians to leave old Homs, but the Red Cross failed in taking them out. What delayed the dispatch of those shipments, those convoys, was the fact that one of the main leaders of the armed groups in old Homs threatening that if those shipments or this convoy enters, they will open fire on it, because their demand is not the arrival of those shipments of supplies, but they want is for them to leave with their weapons, with the civilians, through a safe corridor to another village. Now, if you want to hear what was said, we have that, and our brother Tamim could perhaps furnish you with those statements. This was the reason for the delay. So concerning the question of Homs, it is still being addressed. We are willing to allow the civilians to leave, and for the women and children, we have got women, female police personnel to assist them, and those amongst the armed elements who would like to surrender themselves and their weapons, yes, they are welcome, and they will be covered by a settlement of their situation. But for us to transfer the battle from one area to another, that is something that is not admissible rationally. So, Excellency Minister, yesterday the question of terrorism was discussed. So what did the coalition offer you by way of pledges? Did they promise that the terrorists will stop flowing from Turkey and other places? If you want it truly, truthfully, we sense that this delegation and those who are behind that delegation are not in contact, or they have no control of anybody on the ground. They said that they would make contacts with armed people in Old Homs, and we find that one of the senior ones amongst them is threatening and is saying is disassociating himself with this coalition, from this coalition. So the word pledge perhaps is a very big word for them.
You spoke several times of regional support and some Arab countries supporting the cross-border jihad in Syria. Can you repeat, please? So you spoke of regional support to jihadi movements in Syria. Have you presented to the UN documents in this regard? You speak of jihadi. More than 450 letters have been sent, documented to the United Nations, and Dr. Bashar al-Jafari, chief negotiator and our representative at the United Nations, daily or almost daily submits a letter to the Security Council and the Secretary General. But as you know, the balance in the UN in the Security Council is quite distorted.
English. Can we just have a little bit of clarification now on exactly what the process is before December the 10th, when you are supposed to be back here? Who exactly will make that decision on whether you return, whether you take part in the second round? Because you have the most high-level delegation here, yourself and all of the people flanking you. One is left to assume that the decision is going to be made by President Assad.
He and the government, and he will... What is strange in this? He and the government, and he will first read our reports about what's happened this week, and accordingly he will discuss with us, the government also, and then the decision will be taken.
Yes, good afternoon, John Zarakos.
أنا في إلي مدير عم بيدير الأسئلة ما بقدر بتجاوزه على راسي وأنا من سوريا.
Yes, good afternoon, John Zarakos. This is France 24. I was wondering, sir, if you've given a message to Mr. Brahimi to convey to Mr. Kerry or Mr. Lavrov when they meet tonight in Munich. Thank you, sir.
Yesterday, I told Mr. Al-Ibrahimi that since you're going to Munich, it is your duty to ask Mr. Kerry that he reaffirms his support for a political solution and not a military solution, and that he reaffirms through a political solution his commitment to have an atmosphere that is conducive to the success of dialogue in Geneva. We cannot accept double positions. The United States is supporting Iraq in its fight against ISIS, and this is something satisfactory to us, while at the same time it is arming ISIS and al-Nusra in Syria to kill Syrians. This is not understandable. This is my message. Your Excellency, after what you said, have you felt in the whole week of negotiations any feeling that the coalition delegation can contact and impose anything on the ISIS and the al-Nusra and other groupings with regards to any agreement in Geneva? This is a very important question, but it gives the coalition a bigger role than it has. 2 days ago, I heard on ISIS and al-Nusra and Islamia fronts. I read statements on their websites that reject the coalition and that they only want an Islamic state and the destruction of Syria. So I doubt even a group of 5 groupings in old city of Homs, the coalition has no influence on. And if they did, that would in itself be also a problem. Your Excellency, Al-Manar, the time given by Al-Ibrahimi, 10 days to resume negotiations initially if things go as planned by Mr. Al-Ibrahimi, are these sufficient to restructure the opposition delegation and to include other groupings of opposition and the participation of ISIS and maybe others that would lead to a political solution in Syria? We also heard from statements by the coalition that their refusal to the draft document on terrorism does not condemn Hezbollah. What about the Zionist entity in this regard? There is no doubt that the non-invitation of Iran was a big mistake, because without inviting Iran, there is a disregard to the important role of Iran in the region. As for not condemning or not accepting the document on terrorism, this draft does not include names. We condemn terrorism in absolute terms. Hezbollah is a group of combatants who are protecting their country and Hezbollah in a preemptive manner. And we have seen what is happening in the southern suburb of Beirut because of Syrian terrorists. So it is adding insult to injury. As for the mechanism, expanding the delegation of the opposition, this is a matter to the United Nations. The United Nations says it has no role to play in that, says the journalist. There's a director who has planned the questions, and I will just answer. He is the one to lead the press conference.
Mariam Karaoni
from Reuters. Yes, a second time, but in Arabic this time. In all the discussions and everything we heard this week, it seems that none of the two sides is ready to give anything in. And you also disagree as to the starting point. There's no common ground. So why are you here? Why did you come to Geneva? And what was the objective that was not fulfilled? Allow me, is it under Russian influence on me, says the minister? There is a coordination between Syria and Russia. I went to Moscow before the Geneva talks, and there are meetings held after the negotiations, not during, not before, with the Russian side. And I can tell you that there is no Russian pressure on our delegation. There is a coordination. We respect the opinion of the other side. However, at the end of the day, the decision will be Syrian. Microphone to the journalist. We want a political solution, says the minister. We were unable to achieve that. Last question. Habib Salman from the Syrian Arab television. You, as a government, is in charge of the interests of the Syrian people. You submitted an initiative in Moscow before coming here. What happened to that? Also, you work in Syria, and you made assistance arrive to various areas. As for the coalition, it only represents itself. So how can you, or can you give us an idea of the efforts being made by the Syrian government to solve the problems of the Syrian people? His Excellency the Minister, we have a response plan. Its budget is about 40 billion Syrian pounds. We have a high committee for relief under the Minister for Social Affairs, which supervises this matter. In addition to the efforts made by the Minister of Health for vaccines against polio, and that in coordination with UNICEF. Therefore, we will always provide help to every Syrian. These are our people.
ماذا عن مبادراتكم التي قدمتموها في موسكو مع الوزير؟
What about the initiative presented in Moscow? We have submitted initiatives to alleviate or decrease the fighting, and Mr. Lavrov told me, why don't we start with Aleppo? We submitted a comprehensive draft or project to have all the combatants withdraw from Aleppo and for the entry of assistance convoys. This initiative also included that policemen would take their place in order to restore services and utilities in the areas under the control of the armed groups. He asked me, can I submit this to the Americans? I said, no objection. this experience was successful, or if it is successful in Aleppo, we can go to other cities one by one. Until now, I have not received an answer. One last question. Diana Jenad from Sana. Your Excellency, after a week of meeting with this part of the opposition, which is a strange mixture, and asked to hit Syria in a military manner, have you reached a description of this kind of coalition that could help you in the future? The Minister, sometimes, in order to protect your country, you are obliged to deal with things that you may not be convinced of. Therefore, we have been patient this week, and we held serious talks, but we are also aware that we are talking with them and those behind them. And those behind them, if they wanted a political solution, we stand ready. Thank you very much.